The phone call came on a Tuesday, a day that would forever be etched in my memory, not just for the devastating news it carried, but for the chilling prelude it would become to a betrayal that would shake my world. It was my mother, her voice a fractured whisper, delivering the words I had always dreaded. "Eleanor, Grandma Evelyn, she's gone." The world tilted. Grandma Evelyn? My anchor, my confidant, the gentle soul who had filled my childhood with warmth and wisdom, was no more. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a grief so profound it felt physical. I loved my grandmother fiercely. She wasn't just a grandparent, she was the sun around which my emotional universe revolved. From the moment I was a little girl, tracing the delicate lines on her wrinkled hands as she read me stories, to the late-night phone calls in my adulthood where she offered solace and perspective, Grandma Evelyn was a constant, unwavering presence. Her house, a cozy two-story Victorian with a sprawling garden, was my sanctuary. It smelled of lavender, old books, and her famous apple pie. Every summer, I spent weeks there, learning to bake, tending to her roses, and listening to her stories about a bygone era. She taught me resilience, kindness, and the importance of standing up for what's right. She often told me, with a twinkle in her eye, that I had her spirit, her independent streak. "This house, Eleanor," she'd say, gesturing around the living room, "holds memories, and it will always be a place of comfort for you, always." I cherish those words, believing them to be a testament to our unbreakable bond. But the days following her death were not filled with shared grief, but with an unsettling silence from my extended family. My Aunt Carol, Grandma Evelyn's only living child, took charge, and it was a charge that felt more like a hostile takeover. I wasn't consulted on funeral arrangements. My calls to offer help went unanswered. When I arrived at the viewing, a lump forming in my throat at the sight of my grandmother's peaceful, yet unnervingly still face, Aunt Carol barely acknowledged me. Her eyes, usually sharp and critical, held a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher. Triumph, perhaps? It made my stomach churn. I tried to dismiss it as grief, as her way of coping, but the exclusion continued. The funeral itself was a blur of hushed condolences and averted gazes. I felt like an outsider, a distant relative, despite being Grandma's closest grandchild. The ache in my heart wasn't just for my grandmother, but for the unexpected loneliness that surrounded her passing. A week after the funeral, I received a curt email from Aunt Carol. It wasn't an invitation, but an announcement. "The reading of Mother's will is scheduled for next Friday at the lawyer's office. Your presence is not required." My blood ran cold. Not required? For my own grandmother's will reading? It was an insult so blatant, so cruel, that it momentarily eclipsed my grief. I forwarded the email to my mother, who simply sighed. "Eleanor, you know Carol. She's always been difficult. Don't let it get to you." But it already had. I spent the next few days in a fog, a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. I replayed every conversation with Grandma Evelyn, searching for clues, for any indication that she might have distanced herself from me. There were none, only memories of affection, shared secrets, and promises of a future intertwined. This couldn't be right. Grandma Evelyn wouldn't have wanted this. Driven by a gnawing suspicion and a desperate need for answers, I decided to go to the lawyer's office anyway. It was a small act of rebellion, a quiet defiance against the wall Aunt Carol had erected between me and my grandmother's memory. I arrived a few minutes before the scheduled time, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The waiting room was hushed, the air thick with anticipation. Aunt Carol was already there, flanked by her two children, my cousins, who offered me only strained smiles. They looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze, which only fueled my unease. When the lawyer, a stern-faced man named Mr. Harrison, finally called them in, I hesitated. Should I just leave? But then a surge of resolve. No, I belong here. I had every right. Taking a deep breath, I followed them into the tastefully decorated office. Aunt Carol's head snapped up when she saw me. Her eyes narrowed, a flash of annoyance crossing her features. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What are you doing here? I specifically said you weren't required." "I'm here for my grandmother," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want to hear her last wishes." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, a silent plea for decorum. He began to read. The will was concise, outlining bequests to various charities, a small sum to my mother, and then the bulk of Grandma Evelyn's estate, including the house, was left to Aunt Carol and her children. There was no mention of me, not a single word, not a trinket, not a remembrance, nothing. The blood drained from my face. It was as if I had been erased from my grandmother's life, from her final thoughts. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just about money or possessions. It was about a profound public rejection. How could Grandma Evelyn, who loved me so much, have done this? As Mr. Harrison finished, Aunt Carol leaned forward, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Well, there you have it, Eleanor," she announced, her voice echoing in the sudden silence of the room. "We already divided everything. You weren't invited for a reason. Mother made her wishes clear." She looked at me, her eyes glinting with a malicious satisfaction that made my stomach clench. "Perhaps you misunderstood your place in the family." Her words hit me like a physical blow. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on me. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. The betrayal wasn't just from the will. It was in Aunt Carol's cruel, gloating declaration, the way she savored my pain. My cousins fidgeted, unable to meet my gaze. Even Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable, though his expression remained professionally neutral. I couldn't speak. My throat felt constricted, raw with unshed tears and a burning anger. I simply turned and walked out, the silence of the waiting room a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I stumbled out onto the street, the bright sunlight suddenly blinding. A taxi whizzed by, its horn blaring, but all I could hear was Aunt Carol's voice, echoing in my ears. "You weren't invited for a reason." The next few days were a blur of tears and rage. My mother tried to console me, attributing Aunt Carol's behavior to her inherent greed and a long-standing jealousy she harbored towards the special bond Grandma Evelyn and I shared. "Your grandmother adored you, Eleanor. Something isn't right," she'd say, her own voice tinged with sadness and frustration. "But what can we do? It's her will." But I couldn't accept it. The image of Grandma Evelyn, her gentle smile, her loving eyes, refused to reconcile with a will that completely disinherited me. She had explicitly told me many times that her house, her sanctuary, would always be mine to come home to. She had even shown me a small locked wooden box tucked away in her study, telling me it contained important papers for your future. I had dismissed it as a sweet, grandmotherly eccentricity at the time, but now it haunted me. I decided then, through the haze of grief and anger, that I would fight, not just for any potential inheritance, but for Grandma Evelyn's true wishes, for her memory, and for the principle of what was right. My grandmother deserved to have her final desires honored, not manipulated by a greedy relative. My first step was to find a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in estate law and wasn't afraid to challenge a well-established will. I searched online, reading reviews, feeling overwhelmed by the legal jargon and the daunting task ahead. Finally, I found Mr. David Davies, a man with a reputation for being tenacious and empathetic. His office, unlike Mr. Harrison's, was warm and inviting, filled with books and a faint scent of coffee. I sat across from him, recounting the story, my voice trembling at times, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I described my relationship with Grandma Evelyn, the special bond we shared, the countless hours spent together, the promises she'd made. I told him about the will reading, Aunt Carol's cruel words, and the baffling exclusion. I even mentioned the mysterious wooden box. Mr. Davies listened patiently, his gaze unwavering. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "It's a difficult case, Eleanor," he began, his voice calm and measured. "Challenging a will is an uphill battle. The burden of proof is high. We'd need to demonstrate undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, or improper execution. Do you have any concrete evidence that your grandmother's wishes were different?" My heart sank. Only her words, Mr. Davies, her promises, the way she lived her life, her love for me. And that box. I don't know what's in it, but she always said it was important for my future. He tapped his pen against a legal pad. Verbal promises are notoriously hard to prove in court, and a mysterious box, well, it could contain anything. However, he paused, your conviction is strong, and Aunt Carol's behavior does raise red flags. Her immediate and explicit exclusion of you, her gloating, it suggests a motive beyond simply administering the will. Tell me everything you remember about your grandmother's last months. Was she ill? Was she frail? Was Aunt Carol around her constantly? I poured out every detail. Grandma Evelyn had been diagnosed with a mild form of dementia in her final year, but it was intermittent. She had good days and bad days. Aunt Carol had moved in with her to help about 6 months before her passing, ostensibly to care for her. But now, looking back, I remembered how my visits had become subtly discouraged, how Aunt Carol always seemed to be present during our phone calls, how Grandma Evelyn sometimes seemed a little more subdued, a little less herself when Aunt Carol was nearby. "Aha," Mr. Davies said, a glint in his eye. "Undue influence. That's our angle. If Aunt Carol was living with her, managing her affairs, and your grandmother was experiencing cognitive decline, even mild, there's a possibility she exploited that vulnerability to manipulate the will." The word manipulate sent a shiver down my spine. It felt right, chillingly so. This was exactly what Aunt Carol was capable of. Our investigation began. Mr. Davies started by requesting a copy of the will from Mr. Harrison, along with any previous wills Grandma Evelyn might have made. He also sought medical records to establish the timeline and severity of her dementia. Meanwhile, I became a detective in my own right. I contacted old family friends, neighbors who had known Grandma Evelyn for decades. I revisited her house, now officially Aunt Carol's, under the pretense of collecting some personal items. I searched for clues, for anything that might point to my grandmother's true intentions. I remembered the wooden box. It had been in Grandma Evelyn's study, on a high shelf behind a collection of antique globes. I decided to pay a visit to the house, armed with a carefully crafted reason. Aunt Carol, surprisingly, allowed me in, though she hovered, her eyes like a hawk's. I feigned looking for an old photo album in the study, my heart pounding with each step. The shelf was empty. The box was gone. A cold dread washed over me. Aunt Carol must have found it. My last hope seemed to vanish. I returned to Mr. Davies, defeated. "The box is gone," I told him, my voice flat. "She must have taken it." Mr. Davies remained calm. "It's a setback, but not the end. If it contained anything relevant, she wouldn't want us to see it. That in itself is telling." He then delivered some news. "I've obtained copies of your grandmother's previous wills. The last one, dated 5 years ago, explicitly left you a significant portion of the estate, including the house." My breath hitched. The house. It was exactly what I remembered Grandma Evelyn promising. So she did intend for me to have it. "Indeed," Mr. Davies confirmed. "This drastically strengthens our position. The burden now shifts somewhat. We can argue that the most recent will, which disinherits you completely, is an anomaly, likely influenced by Aunt Carol during a period of vulnerability. We have a solid basis to file a caveat against the probate of the new will." The legal battle officially began. Mr. Davies filed the necessary documents, challenging the validity of Grandma Evelyn's final will. The family's reaction was immediate and furious. Aunt Carol called me, her voice shrill with outrage. "How dare you, Eleanor? How dare you question Mother's wishes? This is a disgrace. You'll get nothing, absolutely nothing." She threatened to sue me for legal costs, to cut me off from the family entirely. My cousins, under her influence, sent me scathing messages, accusing me of being greedy and disrespectful. But I held firm. Mr. Davies had prepared me for this. They're trying to intimidate you, Eleanor. Don't back down. We have a strong case. The first step was mediation, an attempt to resolve the dispute outside of court. We met in a neutral conference room, Aunt Carol and her lawyer, Mr. Harrison, on one side, Mr. Davies and I on the other. The tension in the room was palpable. Aunt Carol sat stiffly, her lips a thin line, glaring at me. The mediator, a kindly but firm woman, outlined the process. Mr. Davies began by presenting our case, detailing the history of my relationship with Grandma Evelyn, the previous will, and the timeline of Aunt Carol moving in and my grandmother's declining health. He subtly implied undue influence, painting a picture of a vulnerable elderly woman isolated by her only daughter. Aunt Carol, predictably, became agitated. "This is outrageous. My mother was perfectly lucid. She knew exactly what she was doing. Eleanor was never as close to her as she claims. She only visited when she wanted something." "Mrs. Vance," Mr. Davies interjected calmly, "we have sworn affidavits from numerous neighbors and friends attesting to Eleanor's frequent visits and deep bond with your mother. Furthermore, the previous will, executed when your mother was undeniably of sound mind, reflects a very different distribution of assets." Mr. Harrison, Aunt Carol's lawyer, tried to defend her, arguing that people are free to change their wills and that Eleanor had no proof of manipulation. He dismissed the previous will as irrelevant, citing Grandma Evelyn's right to change her mind. Then, Mr. Davies dropped a bombshell. "We also have a sworn statement from a former caregiver, Miss Brenda Jenkins, who was employed by Mrs. Evelyn Vance for several months before Mrs. Carol Vance moved in. Miss Jenkins states that Mrs. Vance explicitly expressed her desire for Eleanor to inherit the house, and that Mrs. Vance was distressed about her daughter, Carol, constantly pressuring her to change her will, especially regarding the house." Aunt Carol gasped, her face paling. "That's a lie. Brenda was fired for incompetence." "Miss Jenkins' records indicate she resigned due to a hostile work environment created by you, Mrs. Vance, shortly after you moved in," Mr. Davies countered, his voice like steel. "She also states that she overheard you discussing how to handle your mother's stubbornness about the house." Mr. Harrison's professional facade wavered. He glanced at Aunt Carol, a distinct frown creasing his brow. It was the frown mentioned in the prompt, a silent acknowledgement that his client's position was weakening, her carefully constructed lies beginning to crumble under the weight of truth. Aunt Carol visibly deflated, her smugness replaced by a desperate, cornered look. The mediator, sensing the shift, pressed on. "Mrs. Vance, this is serious. Undue influence is a grave accusation. If this goes to court and Miss Jenkins testifies, along with the evidence of your mother's previous will and her cognitive state, the court may well find in Eleanor's favor, potentially invalidating the entire will." She then turned to me. "Eleanor, what is it you seek?" I looked at Aunt Carol, who refused to meet my gaze. "I want my grandmother's wishes to be honored," I said, my voice strong and clear. "She wanted me to have the house. It was her sanctuary, and she wanted it to be mine. I'm not asking for everything, just what she always intended for me." The mediation continued for hours, a grueling back and forth. Aunt Carol, despite the mounting evidence, continued to deny, to argue, to make excuses. But Mr. Harrison's frown deepened with each piece of evidence Mr. Davies presented. He knew, and she knew, that her position was becoming untenable. Finally, Mr. Harrison pulled Aunt Carol aside for a private conversation. I watched them, my heart a drumbeat in my chest. When they returned, Aunt Carol's face was a mask of furious resentment. "Fine," she spat, looking at the mediator, not me. "I'll agree to relinquish the house to Eleanor, but she gets nothing else. And I want a non-disclosure agreement. I don't want this sordid affair aired publicly." Mr. Davies exchanged a quick glance with me. "It wasn't everything, but it was the most important thing. It was Grandma Evelyn's house, her legacy to me, the symbol of our bond. "We accept those terms," he said, calmly. The agreement was drafted and signed. I walked out of that conference room feeling a profound mix of exhaustion and vindication. I hadn't just won a legal battle, I had reclaimed a piece of my grandmother's soul, a testament to her enduring love for me. Aunt Carol had tried to erase me, to rewrite history, but she had failed. It took several more months for the probate process to finalize and for the house to officially transfer into my name. When I finally received the keys, a wave of emotion washed over me. The house still smelled faintly of lavender and old books, but now it felt different. It felt like home again, truly mine, filled with the echoes of Grandma Evelyn's laughter and love. I walked into her study, the room where the wooden box had once sat. Though the box itself was gone, I knew its contents had been crucial in proving my case. Aunt Carol had probably destroyed them, but the memory of them, and what they represented, had been enough. I ran my hand over the empty shelf, a quiet sense of peace settling over me. My relationship with Aunt Carol and my cousins remained fractured. They never truly apologized, never acknowledged their wrongdoings. But I found that I no longer cared. The fight had been for Grandma Evelyn, for her truth, and for my own peace of mind. I had honored her memory in the way she deserved. I spent the following years restoring the house, tending to the garden, and filling it with new memories, always keeping Grandma Evelyn's spirit alive within its walls. I often sat in the living room, looking out at the rose garden, remembering her words. "This house, Eleanor, holds memories, and it will always be a place of comfort for you, always." And now, thanks to my resolve and a lawyer's timely frown, it truly was. The injustice had been painful, the betrayal deep, but the ultimate victory, the vindication of my grandmother's love, was a comfort beyond measure.